Merry Christmas, everybody. Merry Knicksmas. If you're a Knicks fan, as the Knicks take on the Spurs today at MSG. We got a lot to talk about from now until then. I'm with you till 11:30 this morning. Hope everyone is having a wonderful start to their Christmas. Happy holidays to everyone. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Kwanzaa. Jake Asman with you, alongside Harvey Cruz and Joe Leo producing the show. And we certainly got a lot to talk about. Christmas Day, Knicks in action, just feels right. And today's a very unique day because we have not one but two NFL games that are going to be taking place on Netflix, of all places. So hopefully by now you figured out how to stream things on Netflix, and you'll be able to watch not one but two NFL games today. You have the Chiefs in Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. So KC versus the Steelers. That's at 1 o'clock. Baltimore is in Houston to take on the Texans. That game is at 4:30. You'll notice the two teams in each of these games, the four total teams that played today, are the same teams that played last Saturday. So the NFL is essentially, instead of having, you play Sunday, then you have a short week on Thursday, essentially it's now Saturday to Wednesday. So it's the same amount of time in between games if you played on a short week. But I have to imagine it probably feels weird if you're a fan of any of the four teams playing today. We played Saturday, and wait, we're playing Wednesday? This is the COVID season all over again? That's the schedule for football. That's at 1 the first game, 4:30 the second, and then sandwiched in between, you have a litany of NBA games today. Remember when the NBA used to own Christmas? Now the NFL is like, watch this. So you have the Knicks at noon today against the Spurs. That's the first game. 2:30, Timberwolves in Dallas to take on the Mavs. 5 p.m., Celtics hosting the 76ers. 8 p.m., Lakers at the Golden State Warriors in the final game on Christmas. Nuggets at the Suns. So if you're a sports fan, you got games on all throughout the day. And, of course, for the first time ever, 2 games on Christmas featured on Netflix. So we'll talk about that. We'll give out some picks later in the show. But there's always something going on with our football teams, especially the team I root for, unfortunately, the New York Jets. So I want to start with the Jets because yesterday the Jets basically bumped up their week of practice to basically give the players off today on Christmas. So Aaron Rodgers, who normally speaks on Wednesday, he ended up speaking yesterday. And he said a couple things that I think are very relevant to the Jets. Forget these last 2 games here, right? They're going to play in Buffalo as basically a 10-point underdog. They're probably going to lose. Then they play Miami to round out the season. And then after that, there's a lot of uncertainty on what this Jets team is going to look like. And Aaron Rodgers has talked about being open to any scenario that could play itself out. Here's the thing. I started going through a bunch of the options at quarterback for the Jets if, say, they move on from Aaron Rodgers. They release him. Where Aaron Rodgers decides he doesn't want to play football. He wants to retire. The options out there for the Jets are not great. You look at the draft, right? Where are the Jets going to be able to get a quarterback that they could plug and play in this year's class? It feels like that guy does not exist right now. Now, do things change when we get to the combine and pre-draft workouts and everything that goes into hyping quarterback prospects up? For sure. But right now, we keep hearing it's a 2-quarterback class. And you have Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, or Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, in whatever order you want to put them. One of those guys, if not both, will not be there by the time we get to the 3rd pick in the draft. And it's probably going to be quarterback 1 and 2. And one of those guys is in all likelihood is going to be a New York Giant. More on the Giants in a bit. So you look at the options for the Jets. Sam Darnold's not coming back here. We could pretend, but what if the Jets hire Brian Flores from the Vikings coaching staff and Flores makes Josh McCown, who's their quarterback coach, the OC? Would Sam want to do that? It's not going to happen. The Vikings are not going to let Sam Darnold go. There's just no way. So if not Darnold, where are the obvious upgrades for the Jets at the quarterback spot? You can't tell me Tyrod Taylor is a better option right now than Aaron Rodgers. Jacoby Brissett? Gardner Minshew? Andy Dalton? I mean, you go down the list, the options stink. That's just the reality. So, as I sit here on Christmas Day and look at the options for the Jets, Rodgers on a pay cut is the best option for the New York Jets. If he doesn't take a pay cut, then I think the Jets should move on. Because I think a lot of people don't realize the salary cap ramifications of keeping Aaron Rodgers for an extra year. If he plays on his current deal, the New York Jets will deal with a $23 million cap hit next year, which is not a big deal. It's a good number. When Rodgers redid his deal when he became a Jet, it basically gave him 3 years at a manageable cap rate before you have to pay the piper with an enormous cap or dead cap hit if he's on the team for what would be a fourth season. So let's look ahead. Let's say the Jets bring Aaron Rodgers back and he's on the exact same contract that he's on right now. Aaron Rodgers would count against the 2026 Jets salary cap for $63 million. And yeah, you could spread it out over 2 years, but you're still looking at a $43 million cap hit in 2027. What new GM that's coming in for 1 year of Aaron Rodgers wants to deal with $63 million in dead cap either in 26 or in 27? It's not going to happen. So Aaron Rodgers, while on the McAfee show, talked about what I believe is the only thing that would have to happen for him to have a chance to be back at quarterback. He'd have to negotiate a new contract, and if the Jets were smart, they would draft a quarterback, not in the first round, then let's say in the second round, just so they could start being prepared for having an option behind Aaron Rodgers. So if you missed it, this was Aaron on McAfee talking about his uncertain future and the pay cut, mentoring, everything I just alluded to. Take a listen. So I hear that from Rodgers, and that's, to me, the first time he's been on the record acknowledging that if he is going to be back with the Jets next season, he would have to redo his current contract. I mean, I look at it like this. If not Aaron Rodgers, then who? What's the plan? Because you could sell me on moving on from Aaron Rodgers. But my biggest thing as someone who unfortunately has to root for this team is what is your plan if you're not going to have Aaron Rodgers? And whatever the plan is, the plan needs to be decided by the people who are coming in. The next general manager, the next head coach, they have to be the ones deciding this. You know, there's a lot of speculation that Aaron Rodgers and Woody Johnson don't have a great relationship right now. In fact, Rodgers, during this press conference yesterday over Zoom, was asked if he has spoken to Woody at all, and he has said no. So a lot of people are interpreting that as, oh, well, Woody wants him gone. In fact, when I had Rich Cimini on my show on Sunday, he says he believes that Aaron Rodgers and Woody Johnson don't get along and that, you know, Woody's not going to want him back. But ultimately, here's what Woody Johnson needs to do. He needs to listen to his football people, because if his football people say, hey, if Rodgers redoes his deal and we have him for 1 year, that gives us our best chance. Woody Johnson needs to basically listen to what his football people want to do. And I don't know if Aaron Rodgers even wants to be here. Maybe he's just saying a lot of stuff, so the Jets eventually just release him, and then he can go pick what team he wants to go to. Although, once again, I don't know what team is going to give Aaron Rodgers a guaranteed starting spot. So there's a lot of factors at play here. But I say all that to say, if Rodgers is willing to redo his deal to mitigate that $63 million dead cap you're stuck with if he's here for 1 more year, which in all likelihood is all it would be, 1 more season. Because you're either drafting a quarterback this year that sits in this scenario, or you're going to get your quarterback in 2026 and a better quarterback class, right? Everyone thinks about Arch Manning, but there's supposed to be other guys who should be first-round quarterbacks in the 26 draft class as opposed to this year's class, which we hear about the 2 quarterbacks at the top and then a bunch of question marks. So I still sit here watching Aaron Rodgers go out there and have 24 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, have 3,500 yards passing. And I look around and go, where are they finding a better option? And as much as I've been disappointed at times with how Rodgers has played, are we just going to conveniently ignore the fact that this defense went from a top 3 unit to one of the worst in football? Are we just going to ignore the fact that The Jets' kicking situation alone has probably, conservatively speaking, cost them at least 2 games, if not more. I mean, Rodgers has not been great in the fourth quarter with the ball late in his hands in some of these games, but not all of them. What's the job of the quarterback? To give you the lead late. Put you in position to win. The Jets were in position to win in Foxborough against New England, and they allowed Jacoby Brissett to drive right down the field and score a touchdown. They were in position to win against the Indianapolis Colts at MetLife. They had the lead late, and Anthony Richardson went right down the field and won the game for the Colts. That's not on Aaron Rodgers. That's on the Jet defense, which was supposed to be the strength of the team. You bring up the Miami Dolphins game a few weeks back, where Rodgers played very well that day, and the Jets had an 8-point lead late in the fourth quarter, allow a touchdown, 2-point conversion, and then lose the coin toss in overtime, don't get the ball back and lose again. Is that on Aaron Rodgers or that's on the defense? And that's just 3 wins right there. And if the Jets had 3 more wins right now, where would they be? Not to mention Greg Zuerlein and how many crucial misses he had, whether it be the Broncos game, whether it be the Bills game. So Aaron Rodgers is partly responsible for this team's record, but let's not forget what we were expecting Aaron Rodgers to be able to do this year. We were expecting him to be able to go out there, play competently, and take a team that won 7 games with the 32nd ranked offense in the league a year ago, and at the bare minimum, win at least 10 games and be a wild card team. And I've said this, I said it yesterday, I say it all the time. When you watch the Jets this year, their biggest issue is coaching. You can't tell me if they had a real coach, they'd be a 4-win team right now with the talent they do have. So, look, there's a lot of factors at play as I keep coming back to. But tell me what the plan is if it's not Rodgers at quarterback next year. I'm not saying he has to be here, but what's the plan? You can't sell me on Tyrod Taylor at age 36 being this team's starter. He'll play 4 games, get hurt, and then you're either rushing a rookie you drafted on the field or Jordan Travis, who's a 5th-round pick, who hasn't practiced a single day as a professional because he's had multiple setbacks coming back from this gruesome leg injury he suffered over a year ago now. That's the problem. 800-919-3776. Jake Asman with you till 11:30 this morning here on Christmas Day. The other big issue you have to consider here with the Jets, if Aaron Rodgers is not here, I would be stunned if Davante Adams were to be back. Now, they're going to have to redo his contract either way, either cut him or they're going to have to redo it because Davante Adams' cap number next year is around $35 million. It's the highest cap hit for any player that's not a quarterback in the NFL. So he's never going to play on that deal. Everyone knows it. So if you keep Rodgers, you also get Davante back. And here's the thing with the Jets wide receiver room. You have Garrett Wilson. More on him coming up because I think we're making way too much of his frustration and, he's going to request a trade, as if that just means he's not a Jet next year, if that happens, by the way. You have a receiver room right now of Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams. Allen Lazard's contract's no longer guaranteed. He's going to be cut. And then after that, who are your wide receivers? Xavier Gibson? Malachi Corley, who could barely get on the field, despite the fact the Jets were telling everyone he was their 4th-rated receiver in the draft this past year. So you get Rodgers back, but that also means you get Davante back. And if I'm the Jets with a real coach, I'm trying to keep Garrett, Davante, Brees, this core together. They actually got some good news yesterday with Olu Fashanu. Doesn't need surgery. Dealing with plantar fasciitis, but is going to be able to make a full recovery and be ready for the offseason program, which is huge because one of the few things Joe Douglas did do right this past year was draft him at left tackle. He's a very good player. And you feel comfortable with him going forward? So I just think at the end of the day, we all could say, Rodgers is washed, he's this, he's that, and he's clearly not what he once was. But if he's open to taking a pay cut and mentor a young quarterback, what more can he say that would make you feel like it wouldn't maybe be in the best interest if a new regime wanted him to be the quarterback for next year to stay? And I have one other stipulation for Rodgers to be here next year, though. They got to run a real offense. They got to run a real modern NFL scheme because this archaic offense they run is not working. And hopefully Rodgers wakes up and he realizes that. If he's against it, then he won't be here. Yeah, I just finished watching that Netflix documentary on Rodgers, and he talks about all the ego deaths you go through in life. Not having any D1 offers in college was an ego death for him. Falling in the draft was an ego death for him. How he was traded by Favre as a backup was an ego death for him. Everything that's happened in his career that makes Aaron, the at times prickly guy he could be. Well, another ego death's going to be, hey, you don't get to have your buddy Nathaniel Hackett here. You got to run a real offense. And so much of this depends on the coach. Because I think a veteran coach might want to keep Aaron Rodgers. And I know this for a fact, even though Rex Ryan wouldn't say it on DiPietro and Roethlisberger the other day when they asked him, hey, if you're the Jet coach, what would you do with Rodgers? Now he won't answer that question. But a few weeks ago, he did. He said, hey, I'd keep Aaron as long as he'd be willing to learn a modern offense because what they're doing there does not work in today's NFL. And that's Rex saying that. And the knock on Rex was that he was too focused on defense and didn't know enough about offense. So if Rex realizes that, I think a Mike Vrabel would know that. A Brian Flores would know that. But assuming they can run a real offensive scheme, I simply just ask any Jet fan out there, what's the better option than Rodgers on a pay cut as the bridge quarterback for next year? We know how long it takes Aaron to get on the same page with his offense, with his receivers. 4/5 of your offensive lines are already under contract. Garrett's here next year under contract. You have Devontae back next year if Aaron's here. Couldn't I argue with better coaching? Rodgers still gives you the best chance to win next year and you can compete for a playoff spot. We got to adjust what the expectations are. But I don't want to sit here and poo-poo the idea of the Jets making the playoffs next year because that's meaningful. They haven't made the playoffs since 2010. So that to me is still a meaningful thing for a Jet team that obviously has grossly underachieved this year. It's been one of the more disappointing years of my life, if not the most, in Jet history. But, to me, the biggest thing they need to do is first end this playoff drought. Even if they can't win a championship, they get bounced in the wild card game next year. Going 9-8 and making the playoffs is not nothing for a team that hasn't made the postseason since 2010. And I still think when you evaluate the options here and where they're going to be picking in the draft and the quarterbacks available there, there's a strong case to be made. Rodgers gives them the best chance to win for next year. And it doesn't force you to have to play a young quarterback who's not ready. Because I'm sick and tired of the Jets throwing out these young quarterbacks to the Wolves. Let them sit. The last time the Jets actually had a quarterback sit for more than a year was Chad Pennington. And guess what? That worked. Chad was a very good quarterback when he played. When he played, they made the playoffs. Unfortunately, injuries derailed Pennington's career. But that was the last time the Jets actually drafted a quarterback and that guy sat and wasn't forced to play right away. And it worked. 800-919-3776. 800-919. ESPN is the number. This was Rodgers yesterday. He was asked, what would it mean for the Jets to want you back next year? A lot of factors before we get to a decision made on Rodgers, but I will reiterate this again. Whatever they decide, you hope it's the football people deciding it. It cannot be, a Woody Johnson saying you have to keep Aaron or you have to get rid of him. Because I think if you brought in Mike Vrabel, who's my number one preference as the next coach of this team, he's got a personal relationship with Aaron. I think Mike Vrabel would say, yeah, give me Aaron on a 1 year basis. And we're going to run a real offense and he'll respect me. Because that's the thing. You bring in a first-time head coach, Aaron might eat that guy alive. I don't think he's going to be able to eat alive a Mike Vrabel or a Brian Flores. Those guys won't take Aaron basically pushing back on running a modern offense. And if he's not open to it, then you move on. But I'm not going to sit here and eliminate any option at this point. 2 games to go. And so much uncertainty. One thing is for sure. It's easy to blame Rodgers for this season being what it is, but if you watch the games, you watch the amount of leads the Jets have had in the fourth quarter. the losses by 6 points or less. You realize that with better coaching and the Jets just finding a competent kicker, which I get it is easier said than done. Jets, by the way, added another kicker yesterday because the guy that had been kicking, Anders Carlson, suffered from Greg Zuerlein syndrome, as we all watched on Sunday. So they probably have a new kicker against Buffalo this week. But ultimately, the options aren't great. And I think Rodgers kind of needs the Jets if he's going to play next year, and the Jets might need Rodgers to be their bridge for a year. And that's where we're at. 800-919-3776. I'm curious how this fan base feels. Would you keep Rodgers on a pay cut like he says he'd be open to taking and have him be the quarterback next year? That's the question right now. We got a lot to talk about. Alan Hahn's going to join me this morning at 9 o'clock. He'll be on his way to MSG for Knicks Spurs today at the Garden. Pregame starts at 11:30, so we'll talk plenty of basketball. That's right, baby. Wemby in the building. Victor Wembanyama. Remember last year, he made his debut, I think it was like his 8th game as a pro at MSG. Knicks won that night. And then when they played in San Antonio, Jalen Brunson, what did he score, like 50-something points that night? And Wembanyama had like 40 and 20. It was a crazy game that the Spurs won. But they'll meet for the first time since that matchup today. Knicks Spurs on Christmas Day. Lot to talk about. We start with the Jets, though, after what Aaron Rodgers said yesterday. Once again, number to call, 800-919-3776. You can always tweet me at Jake Asman. Best responses we'll read over the air. Lot to do. Jake Asman with you, filling in for DNR. Lot to talk about. Keep it right here. It's 880 ESPN New York and the ESPN New York app.